Hello, everybody, and welcome to the premiere of The Download, a series of virtual events brought to you by our team here at Be Real New York. And welcome to the premiere of the... My name is Jonathan. I'm the Executive Creative Director here in the New York office. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Grace Roberts, our Head of Business Development, and Eric Heaton, our Tech Director, for bringing this platform to life for us and for all of you. Our team is very excited to have a conversation with you, so please take note of the chat feature here on the right side of your screen and feel free to ask any questions you would like as we go. We will answer them certainly throughout and definitely at the end when we have time. For those of you who are maybe not as familiar or totally sure about who we are, Be Real is an independent global creative agency with 5 offices across Europe and North America. We have a strong legacy of digitally forward brand innovation through comms, product development, and experiences. The brands we partner with cover the spectrum from consumer goods to tech, entertainment, and fashion. And today's topic involves one of those partners. LVMH is a long-standing partner for Be Real, and we do work across their fashion labels as well as luxury spirits and some others. Today, we're going to talk about Fenty, an explosively successful new line from Rihanna, and the first new fashion house launched under the LVMH portfolio in nearly 32 years. And I'm proud to introduce the 2 creatives of Be Real who brought the Fenty brand to the world, Pieter Konickx and Suchi Ahuja. The pair are diverse and dynamic in their creative lives. Suchi is of Indian descent and grew up in Norway. She's a well-known DJ in various parts of the world and uses music to inspire her creative approach. And Pieter is a native of the Netherlands who participates in food, design, 3D digital creations, photography, you name it. The 2 of them lead a lot of Be Real's creative efforts here out of our New York office, and it's good to see them both. I now turn it over to Pete and Suchi.
Yeah, thank you, mystery moderator Jonathan Graham. Thank you guys for joining our first virtual event. I want to give you guys a little bit of context into how our journey with Fenty started before we dive into the exciting world of Fenty. And we were lucky enough to have Fenty and LVMH approach us after having seen a couple of pieces of work we've done in the past, specifically for Berluti and H&M. We've been working with H&M for the past 12 years now and have been helping them sort of launch their collab collections. And we've also established a pretty good relationship with LVMH in the past through some of the work we've done for Loro Piana and Berluti. And what really resonated with Fenty specifically was how we really pushed the conventions of launching H&M's collection digitally, but also ways we kind of disrupted social media to launch the collections in fresh ways. Another thing that really resonated with them was looking at the work we had done for Berluti, where we specifically took a pretty old-fashioned luxury fashion brand and brought that into a more modern conversation. And brought that into a more modern conversation by creating an immersive e-commerce experience that kind of pushed the boundaries of what e-commerce could be, whilst also championing storytelling. So those were 2 specific cases that kind of caught their attentions. I mean, we'd love to take you through those case studies today, but unfortunately we're tight on time. But please feel free to go on Be Real's website and have a browse just to give you guys a little bit of context in terms of how our journey started with Fenty. But let's talk about Fenty, the reason why you all are here. So Rihanna and her team approached Be Real to help bring Fenty into the world as a modern-day luxury fashion brand. And as Jonathan mentioned earlier, Fenty is the first launch of a new house at LVMH for 32 years. So you can imagine that, you know, besides it being a launch in a brand from Rihanna, it was also just generally really highly anticipated in the fashion industry generally. And 32 years is a pretty long time. So when we got the brief and looked at how things have changed in terms of purchasing luxury fashion, we obviously understood that the consumer landscape has pretty much changed. In fact, it was pretty much unrecognizable. So it was an exciting opportunity for us when they came, and yeah, we basically knew that we had to adopt a pretty new approach, almost an entirely new approach to what LVMH and generally luxury fashion houses are used to and have been used to in terms of launching a new brand.
Yeah, and when we start such a journey with a brand and defining, what they're going to stand for and how they're going to approach their consumers, we always start looking at the target audience, of course, like many of us do. So we really had to define what this modern fashion consumer was, and how it behaved and what their habits were. So diving deeper into it, we looked at ourselves, looked at lots of different categories, of luxury fashion, but also your fast fashion, and how those consumers interact with the brands and the e-commerce experiences. And there was two things that quite quickly pulled up. The first one is that we are these days shopping on our terms. And what I mean by that is that, with the internet being available to almost everyone, we can shop whenever we want, where we want, from our sofas, and we can shop from wherever we want. We can shop in Korea, in Australia, in the US, and get it all be put in front of our doorstep for us to pick up. So I think that that change has changed the high street, has changed the physical stores, because those physical stores like Barney's and Forever 21, they're really struggling to keep up with these consumer habits and those consumer needs to shop way more fluidly. And I think brands like Net-a-Porter, Farfetch, and Fashion Nova, who are just and only online, they are starting to thrive because of their ability to quickly adapt to the consumer behaviors, because they don't have the infrastructure to having to put the product into a store and then from the store into the consumer's hands. So especially in today's time with COVID, when we see that a lot more purchasing is happening online, we, bigger brands need to adapt to that quickly. And I think the big brands that have invested heavily into flagship stores are struggling with that because they don't know how to copy that flagship experience into an e-commerce experience. So that's the first thing. We shop on our terms. It's very important to understand. It's not you determining how we shop. We, as a consumer, can do that ourselves. And secondly, our runway is social media, and social media is in turn the runway. And what I mean by that is that, these days, if you look at a runway show, you can mimic that on Instagram by just posting these pictures and be able to get inspired by that and to purchase that straight away. And it's not just brands that are doing that. There are people who are doing this too. They make their own runways of their Instagram accounts, and you'll be able to purchase that directly from that. And on the other hand, it's also where we create trends and where we find inspiration. It is where we are, putting the looks that we like on, and then people can be inspired by that, like if they would be inspired by a runway. So in that way, I think it's very important to look at how we as a community influence fashion instead of the other way around, fashion influencing communities. So these points show that the consumers of today are very fast moving. Their behavior changes with the apps that are coming going live. So I think it's also important to look at how your consumers and the audience uses different apps that might not be linked to your products, but in that way sort of mimic their behavior and learn from that behavior. So I believe that these new e-commerce brands, they are the ones that are going to be able to adapt really quickly because they already build natively in the internet and do not rely on these heavy, big flagship stores. So those are two things that we learned from looking at the audience.
Yeah, and we also learned a lot from looking at Fenty as sort of the new face of luxury fashion, and also how they decided to run as a luxury fashion house had evolved quite a bit. So they had a lot of disruptive ideas around how they wanted to kind of approach the world of fashion. And a part of Rihanna's manifesto for Fenty was to inspire, to empower, to clash, and to include. Inspire, empower, and include is kind of self-evident, but clash was kind of interesting because there was a lot of talk around not being confined by rules, especially in luxury fashion that is so rigid and so structured around systems and seasons and looks. And they wanted to kind of really have a more fluid approach that was ever changing and dynamic and could keep adapting to, the way people were moving and dressing. So it was quite important for us to make sure that at every virtual touch point, from the branding to design to the shopping experience, that we had ensured that these key points were all accurately conveyed and offered consumers a pretty strong sense of what Fenty stands for in a brand. And later on, you'll see some examples of how we kind of looked at these pillars and brought them to life through an e-commerce experience and start to sort of, show what Fenty stands for as a brand. But there are also a couple of other things that shows how Fenty as a luxury fashion brand is taking on a pretty disruptive approach. The first one being Fenty doesn't design around seasons at all. So this was a huge deal for LVMH as well. Instead, there's a continuous kind of random stream of releases that can pretty much happen at any time, which was kind of cool for us because it challenged us to create something that was hyper adaptive, hyper responsive. But also when you think about consumers, it kind of kept them a little bit on their toes to sort of check back on the site just in case it missed something, which was kind of cool for a luxury brand. Another thing that they wanted to define was, or not define, was looks. They didn't believe in the concept of look. So there was no way at all to shop a specific look from head to toe, which you often see on luxury fashion sites. Instead, what they wanted to convey in the experience was ways to show how you can wear the different pieces and interpret the different pieces in your own unique way. And we will go into a little bit more detail into how we brought that notion to life. But you can kind of already see that there were a lot of things that sort of defined the Fenty approach and showed how they were doing things quite differently in the space of luxury fashion. So it was a pretty unique brand vision that we had to bring to life. So obviously we knew we had to do something quite disruptive and innovative and unexpected because this is by nature a brand that is pretty disruptive. So we knew that whatever the flagship experience is, it needs to convey that same sort of attitude. So kind of looking at, the landscape of fashion, how people have changed their shopping behaviors, and looking at Fenty's approach, we knew that it was important for Fenty to launch as a digital-first luxury brand and go beyond the conventions of having a physical flagship store. And this was the key thing here, is that we wanted to launch Fenty as digital first and go beyond physical. And the solution was pretty much right in front of us, and it was the internet. So why not launch a high-end luxury flagship store purely digitally? And that is exactly what we did, which came with a few challenges, of course, because as their only flagship experience, we had to make sure that this became the ultimate destination, digital destination, where the collection stories, the craft and the quality of the products, who are very high-end products, but also the e-commerce experience, everything came together to create a new luxury experience that felt natural to the way modern consumers shop today. So there were a lot of pieces to seamlessly bring together. But we worked pretty closely with Rihanna and her team. We were lucky enough to have her personal stylist, Jalil, came into Burial, almost regularly every weekend. I think together with her team, we managed to get to a pretty exciting end product and beautiful end product that felt true to her vision, but also feels like it's really encompassing the, Fenty as a brand.
Yeah, so what we landed on was this beautiful website. And what happened was during this process is that, we were locked into this room for about 2 months. Because it was
solitary confinement.
Solitary confinement, yes. It was like a biggest fashion secret of 2018, so no one knew that we were working on this. But what I'd like to talk to you about is the learnings that we have from doing this job and the experience that it gave us. So first of all, I think what you see here is the first launch when there was only 3 releases. Some things to note, of course, this is a shopping site, but we didn't put any products for you directly to buy on this front page because it's a flagship store, and each of these releases are different stories. Almost like if you would walk, on your shopping street and you would walk past the window on this store and you kind of get a hint of what the product might be, but you don't know exactly. It's way more visual. There's way more going on than just some products that you can directly purchase. So see it more like a front door or window into the store itself. Now, whilst we're designing this, we kept raising the bar for ourselves to make this more interesting than it was, or interesting than just an e-commerce site, because that's what Fenty is, right? It's the biggest launch in 2018, so we needed to push and push and push to make us interesting. And we did that by always asking ourselves this one question: how do you design a website when even websites are out of fashion? And we answered that question by creating this site, but we took 5 key learnings that I think will help you, maybe be inspired or maybe think about things a little bit differently when you're doing your own projects. So the first one being digital branding. And this seems like super obvious, right? Because, branding needs to be front and center of the website. But a lot of times we still see that the branding on a website is exactly the same as a branding on a poster or branding on a product. And it doesn't allow for this idea that we're watching it on a digital format. And a digital format allows for way more storytelling than just a still image. So together with the branding agency, Commission Studios, who designed the logo, we talked a lot to them about, hey, how do we animate this? How do we make this interesting? And how do we make this sort of the visual beacon of the brand? And we came up with this idea of creating a ticker. And this ticker represented that idea that Rihanna is a constantly evolving universe of ideas. Right? She started out as a singer, became a style icon, started a skincare brand, and now is one of the creative directors of a top fashion label. So in that way, this ticker is kind of like a news headline of all these things that are going on in Rihanna's life. And that's what we try to achieve, to always give that urgency, always something new, always something next that's going to happen with Rihanna's ideas and her fantasies. So here you see how that comes to life on the site. So on the left, you see how the mobile homepage has this ticker running through it at all times, kind of bringing that idea there's a new story, there's a new thing happening, a new upcoming event, something breaking news that's happening right in front of you. And then we adapted that ticker to also add urgency to different points in the site. So here in the middle, you see 2 examples of how that might work on different thumbnails or product shots, and how we drove that urgency of a breaking news ticker to these buttons. And finally, on the right, we have what you call a product description page. And on this, you see the product title, the price, the codes, what color of the item you wanted to buy. And then the famous and most important button on any site, your purchase button. And we decided to challenge that button and to make it animated, which is also a very big no-go, and change the copy on it from buy it now or buy it to bag it, to be more in line with Rihanna's language, be more in line with Rihanna's audience. And she loved it. She fell in love with it straight away. And we got to push through the LVMH people because they were very worried that this might end up being like a big hiccup point. People don't press this button anymore. But actually the opposite happened. People still purchased everything with that button. And I think it's also down to the point that these prices on the site are quite high and people are not necessarily, the button is not the thing that makes the conversion. It's just that wanting that product. So that's digital branding for you. I think it's a very simple step of making a website super interesting if you approach a digital branding slightly differently.
Yeah, and another pretty important aspect that we had to keep in mind throughout the whole kind of creative process was to create a sense of a connected narrative. Because there's a pretty good chance that people will probably enter a fashion site based on something they've browsed on Instagram or seen in a story or through an influencer post, where they've seen a particular piece with a bit of a story around it or a context around it, especially if it's coming from a brand and, we're posting the campaign story on Instagram, you would kind of want to carry that story through after the moment you see it, right? So that was really important, to create a red thread that follows through with that story each step of the online experience. So an example of that, if you go on to the next page, here you see an example of an Instagram story that then would lead you onto a homepage, the Fenty homepage. And then from the Fenty homepage, you will be then redirected to the catalog page where the collection story really starts to unravel and come to life. So you can kind of see the narrative is still always kind of told through But as you sort of scroll and unravel the story, that kind of takes you to the product page, which is a little bit more straighter, and you can kind of start to browse products on its own. So to us, the main kind of takeaway here was how can we make sure that the product browsing experience, but also the stories behind the pieces and the stories behind the collection seamlessly fit together and never feel like two siloed elements when you're browsing the journey.
Yes, that's about the connectiveness. Another thing that I think was very important for us to explore and to apply to the site's design was the idea of familiar habits. And what I mean by familiar habits is to copy things people are already doing, not necessarily in the e-commerce space, but in the way we are behaving online. Because shopping behavior is increasingly triggered by the stories we see on Instagram. So we looked at Instagram as a platform that everyone seems to be using in the fashion world. Everyone who's like into fashion is huge on Instagram. So we looked at that platform and tried to copy a few of the key elements, key behaviors that were familiar to the audience, and then apply to the site. So that when people arrive to the site, you then you know exactly what you're supposed to do, right? So here you see the homepage on mobile, and you see how this actually exactly looks like an Instagram story interface. You'll be able to swipe through each of these stories or tap through them. You see a little breadcrumb bar that usually at the top of your page on Instagram. And then if you like something, you can just click on the middle of the page, and it will tap you through to that profile or release page and see all the garments of that collection unfold in front of you. So here you see how that would work further along. So on the left, you see how the website will scroll past each of these images, similar to if you were viewing like a fashion blog or an Instagram page, one image at a time, giving you that idea that you just like have everything to take in very slowly, admire it. And on the right, you see how it would then push you through to the product pages. What would happen is that each image on the site has got the products tagged in it. Similar to how you would tag your friends in your Instagram photos, we would tag each product. So the earrings, the shoes, and the dress are all tagged in this. And you would click on the dress and directly be transported to the product description page where you can purchase that product. In that way, mimicking all those habits, kind of copying and stealing all the habits from Instagram to create a very familiar experience for the audience on the website.
Sometimes stealing can be good. And this one was quite fun. It's something we touched on earlier, where we kind of mentioned how Fenty doesn't believe in the concept of defining specific looks. So we wanted to make sure we found a way to encourage and inspire men and women to adopt that same free-spirited, confident attitude to fashion that Rihanna often has, to her own sense of styling and her own sense of kind of wearing clothes. So we created this pretty fun, simple, interactive tool that allows you to view certain pieces, but worn in multiple ways. And these are maybe a little bit more kind of, not as crazy, but we had some really fun ones where you could almost turn a jacket into a hat and a belt into a bag. It was really meant to sort of inspire a lot of creativity, a lot of inventiveness. And she wanted to bring a sense of fun and playfulness into the brand as well, and encourage that same sense of fun and playfulness, for the people and the girls and the men wearing her clothes. It was also another way to kind of mimic the experience of walking into a physical flagship store where you often find a stylist there, right? And they're kind of giving you a lot of styling inspiration and showing you cool ways to wear things that you probably never would have thought of. So this was just a sort of fun digital way to kind of bring that flagship experience to life into the digital flagship.
Yeah, and looking at like the flagship versus digital flagship, if you go to a flagship, or when we could go to flagship stores, of course, to bringing a bit of a sense of a community. Because we felt that was still missing from a website. You feel like you're always alone on there and not really part of like a group of people. So this idea in the fifth key learning, so looking at what happens beyond your store, what happens beyond your flagship, what happens beyond your e-commerce experience. And how we approached it was that we created a very special app an app that I think is unique in a sense that it's only installed on Rihanna's phone. So she's the only one who has access to it. And whenever she would create an Instagram story featuring a product, like in this example, her sunglasses, she would add in the app a ticker to it, the ticker that we have spoken about before. She would write mood, for example. That ticker would be embedded in the story, but as soon as she uploads it to Instagram, that ticker would then become a transparent GIF and upload to Giphy. And as many of you might know, Giphy is the place where Instagram pulls its GIFs from. So when you're searching for GIFs on Instagram, you all pull them from Giphy. What that meant was that anyone who wants to be part of the brand, part of the story, would then go onto Instagram, create their own story, add a GIF, search for, let's say, Fenty mood, and would find the GIF that Rihanna just created for them and add it to their story. So in this way, like, the ticker became the visual beacon for the brand, and it became the visual beacon for that culture that Rihanna created. It became the red thread that ties this whole brand story and community together. So those are kind of our 5 key learnings that we've learned and we want to share with you over this process.
Yeah, and want to obviously kind of wrap things up a little bit. Just kind of looking at the current consumer landscape, as we've mentioned before, it's interesting to see how the physical brick and mortar luxury fashion experience kind of hit its peak last century, but the digital luxury fashion experience has kind of yet to hit its full potential. But we're really excited about Fenty, and we believe that with Fenty, we're starting to deliver on this promise. Carefully constructed as a brand story and an e-commerce shopping experience. We feel that the Fenty flagship, is starting to lead the luxury space and the luxury fashion space into a more modern conversation and into a more modern way of thinking and behaving, and into the modern age, I guess. And also just looking at the current landscape and the current situation, just, with everything that's happening around, you can see how this is becoming more relevant now than ever as well. But also just kind of wanted to wrap things up in terms of our personal kind of creative journey on this, on our learning process throughout this sort of crazy ride. To us, it was interesting because we had to take quite a few step backs when taking on this brief and kind of looking at, what makes a successful brand, whether it's fashion or not. And to us, it's all about adaptation and looking at new mindsets, looking at new behaviors, and most importantly, really looking at culture and looking at the things we can borrow from culture and seamlessly bring in to the work we create now in a way that feels natural and really resonates. So I guess, to us, the challenge was how can we learn to let go of rigid structures that we're so used to, especially in this case was how do we let go of how all e-commerce experiences have been designed in the past and look at what makes a modern consumer tick. So I guess enough babbling. A good reminder for us to make work that really resonates is to don't ask yourself, is this right? But start asking yourself, is this relevant? And that, my friends, sums up our talk.
Yes, I think there might be a few questions.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah, we're waiting. There's a delay. We want to remind the audience to enter any questions you have in the chat feature on the right. There is a slight delay in us getting the questions, but we will answer them. I wanted to ask you, Pete and Suchi, while we're waiting for the audience to participate, you guys emphasize so much in the work you do being relevant and really having a sharp cultural point of view about the way the work you do connects with the audience. Obviously, as 2020 has taken away the opportunity to do pilgrimages to the Gucci store in Soho and things like that, what specific things are you looking forward to in ways that we can experience luxury fashion through a digital scope? And what's next for you guys, do you think, in the fashion world, as far as kind of digital ways to experience it?
I would say, I'm going to start. I would say digital clothing generally and AR. I've already seen a lot of sort of fashion houses that are purely digital and sort of build on the idea of creating avatars or style avatars where you can purchase clothes that are purely digital and kind of use that and overlay that on content that you post on your social media feed, which is kind of an interesting idea in itself, because it's like kind of cool because it's less waste and pretty much zero waste, but you still have the chance to express your individuality and your style through something that is purely digital, which is kind of an interesting look into the new way of expressing your individuality through fashion.
I think that's definitely the most exciting part, is that there's going to be a lot of digital fashion popping up in the next coming years. I also find the trend that's happening right now with DIY content and how Instagram has always been a platform for everything being polished and make everything look perfect. But right now you see with the rise of TikTok, actually the opposite is happening, and people make way more hacky content. So it's harder for luxury fashion brands to actually be part of TikTok, because the polished content that they would create for the luxury brands is just not working on there. So I would like to see what will happen if we start to approach luxury in a more DIY hacky way, and what we can achieve then with writing up of DIY culture on TikTok.
And I think that's interesting because it taps into the fact that the new luxury consumers are young, and we need to realize that this is a changing generation, and they are interested in different things than what people were interested in 32 years ago. So it's like, we need to start looking into, different ways to kind of reach that audience in a way that's relevant to them.
Coming back to the Fenty creation, we have a question that came in from the audience for both of you. What was your inspiration? Were there other websites that you looked at and maybe drew some inspiration from?
God, there were so many websites.
I'll start with this one. My inspiration has always been, Instagram, and that sounds really silly because it's not a website, but I think I remember the day when we were looking at all these different websites, and all of them did the same thing. They would start with like categories, and this idea of like, you want to shop jeans, or you want to shop blouses, or you want to shop shoes. And we know, or actually we didn't know what Rihanna would actually launch with. So they told us to just ignore categories at all. And that meant to me a very simple thing. I was like, okay, then we just start with the stories. And the stories became the Instagram stories. And from there, I was like, this is the site, this is the website, or the app people use most. Let's base everything off here. So I think it wasn't another website that inspired me. It was purely Instagram as a platform.
Right.
Yeah.
Another question, they want to know how difficult it was for BeReal to get a brand as big and established as LVMH to agree to breaking the usual e-com norms that they have proven with other brands in their portfolio. Specifically, breaking the e-com experience. Was this something that was part of the Fenty brief, or something that we really pushed them towards?
I can take that one.
Okay.
I think they had already warmed up to that idea because Rihanna, from the get-go, wanted to do something quite disruptive. And I think LVMH was prepared to have to handle something quite new and something unexpected that they hadn't done before. So I don't think there was too much of a fight in terms of breaking conventions of the e-commerce experience so much, luckily, because LVMH kind of came in with the intention that they wanted to disrupt, because this was such a highly anticipated launch. But yeah, I mean, Pete, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I want to add to that, of course, at LVMH itself, there was doubts and concerns. So we had to back up a lot of our design thinking with research and to sell it into them. But we had the best partner in crime for making something revolutionary. That was Rihanna herself, because she would be in those meetings and telling LVMH that this was the way she wanted to do things, this is the way she believed in, because we convinced her to. And I think so she really helped sell everything in. Everything from like a button design to a menu design or to an account design was all going past her, and she would all give her nod to it and then help sell it in the big meetings.
That's all the questions we've had come in so far. I have one more question for you guys before we wrap up. I want your perspectives. Obviously, as we focus on relevance, one of the most relevant conversations in fashion is about fast fashion, and just your guys' thoughts on how the digital sphere and the digital experience of fashion can maybe be a solution to the problems that are created by the fast fashion world.
I think that goes back to Suchi's point. I think a lot of times we wear stuff not to cover ourselves up or to wear something because it's comfortable, because we wear something because we want to be seen. And more, especially in COVID times, actually, we are seen online and digitally on a platform like Instagram or TikTok. But there's no reason for us to purchase that in the future or purchase products for that, because what we can do and what we are kind of already working on in secret is that we are trying to look at ways of how can we give people new products to wear without owning them or without actually having a physical representation of that product. So imagine that you could go to a store and buy a new hat or a new top or a new dress for you to wear, but just on your Instagram stories or just in your TikTok videos. And that way, you can show off your style and you can show off, your creativity without actually having to, ruin the environment by buying fast fashion.
Yeah, and you also already kind of see a lot of fashion brands are starting kind of pre-owned programs where you can trade in stuff and kind of get credit for buying new things. And it's interesting to also see how they're, when it comes to physical clothing, are trying to think about sustainability and work against fast fashion. And I think when it comes to the digital experience, again, we can really help elevate that system a bit more, and especially with luxury fashion. That is still, there's a long way to go there, I think, when it comes to those kinds of things.
Guys, we're just about out of time. We have one last question that came in, and I think this is a good tactical question that kind of reveals something about us at BeReal. The question is, how long did the Fenty experience take for you to create from front to finish for BeReal? And don't be too revealing about how fast we can work, because
there was a lot of chat from the start of because we were there from the moment she signed the contract, basically. In I think the second or third week, they approached us and they quickly narrowed it down to us as being the partner. So from that, it actually took, I think it was 6 months from the start to finish, but actually the build of the site alone, I think was only about a 2-month period. It wasn't that long. There was a lot of, a start where myself and Suchi were locked up in this room and just brainstormed the hell out of it and came up with 20 or 30 different wild ideas of how to sell clothes online without it being a boring e-commerce experience. So we worked on it for 6 months, I think. I think the production time, about 2 months to get to a solid website that could be built out over time. Because actually now, the website now is different than what it was before when we launched, because there's more products, there's more stuff on there.
And just as a quick follow-up, and I know we're out of time, would you say ideally that there are, things you would want to do differently along that timeline that we, would make more time for part of that process?
No, I think it's actually handled quite well. We had close connections with the team of Rihanna, and they came into the office a couple of times. I don't think there's much I would like to change on that. I think it was quite smooth.
Yeah, and surprisingly very collaborative.
Yes.
Did not expect it to be as collaborative as it was, which was great.
It always helps.
It does. Surprisingly.
Guys, thank you. This has been really inspiring and hopefully informative for all of you who are watching from other places. Thanks again to the BeReal team and to the vision of Rihanna for helping make this happen. Pete and Suchi, it's an honor. And for the rest of you, we'll look forward to seeing you at the next edition of The Download. We'll see you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.